Shavua Tov, good evening. I'm really honored to welcome Rahel to Anshe Sholom, and welcome all of you to Anshe Sholom. Many of you I know, many of you I don't know, so thank you for traveling in. And I also just want to formally, at the beginning of our evening, thank the sponsors, the various sponsors of this evening, which include, most importantly, Davar, as well as JOFA, and Skokie Valley Agudath Jacob, and YCC Rabbinical School, and Pardes, and the Lindenbaum Center for Halakhic Studies. So a whole constellation of organizations that made tonight possible. And just, again, really, really happy that this worked out. Really happy to be sitting with you and to be talking. Our topic tonight, Halakha, change and challenges. And I think I'm going to ask our guests to open, and then I'll have a chance to respond and share some thoughts of my own. And really hope to have a lot of time for questions as well, so that we can spend most of our time speaking about things that are the most compelling and interesting to you. So please.
Well, thank you very much. Shavua Tov to everyone. Really thank you for welcoming me and Davar into your shul. It's a pleasure to be here. Okay, so this evening we're going to talk a little bit about halakha. It's pretty relaxed, so I think we're each going to just say halakha, and what do I understand halakha to be? I feel very, very committed to halakha and to the halakhic system. But I'll tell you a few things about what I think that means. I'm someone who lived my life bound by halakha, and so I think it's something in my life that obligates me to behave in a certain way. But I'm very aware that halakha is a human partnership with the divine, or that's what I think. In Masachet Gittin, it says that the covenant that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made with the Jewish people was based on Torah Sheba'al Peh. And that I understand that to mean that, first of all, any covenant has two sides and two people and two partners to it. Within the spectrum of, I don't know if this is what we want to talk about, but I'm just going to go there. Within the spectrum of views that exist within Chazal, within traditional rabbinic thought about how Torah was given, what was revealed, there are numerous views. The one that speaks to me the most is the one that does not say that everything was said by God to Moshe on Har Sinai, and mostly because there's so many things that appear in the halakha that sometimes I find difficult and challenging. And so I much prefer to say that those things are part of human influence, which is okay for me, because I really think that halakha, I talked about this last night and it appears in the writings of my grandfather, halakha is a word that means to move. And that halakha is really what creates Torah Chaim, the living Torah. And that halakha should speak to every generation of Jews in specific times and in specific places and say different things. Because it really, for Torah to be eternal and to be true, it needs to speak to the situation here and now. And our situation here and now might be different than the situation 500 years ago, and might be different than the situation in 500 years. And so when I see things in the halakha that don't meet my modern sensibilities, that's okay for me. And I feel comfortable, I sometimes am bothered by them, but I feel comfortable saying that I don't believe this is the divine word of God. And I think I'll say clearly why I came to this view. I think it's because I am a woman. Maybe you could come to this view others, but I'll just speak from my personal experience. There was a period of time where I spent a lot of time trying to see, where does God exist in this world, and how do I know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is real and tangible? And for me, the miracle of human life, and that we exist, and that we think, and that we breathe. I once wanted to be a doctor in my young days. Is just, that to me is one of the places I really see miraculousness. And when I encounter a statement within Chazal that says some general statement about women that I know doesn't fit with who I am and the way I think, I have two choices. I could either negate myself and negate the God that I believe created me, or I say, okay, that statement must not be a divine statement. That statement must be something that human beings thought at one point in Jewish history. So that's thing number one. I definitely believe in Torah Mishamayim. I believe that the Yud Gimel Midot were given to Chazal and handed over to Lidrosh et Torah, but I just don't think that every single word is divine. And I tell you this because I that's how I understand the need for halakha to really be aware of who's asking the question and where are they and who they are and how the posek should answer them. I brought a text, you didn't bring this, but I love saying text. So this text was shared to me by my colleague, Tzvi Hirschfeld. It's from Rav Chaim David Halevi, and he says the following. He says this, he says, To'em ma'od kol hachoshev sh'halacha hi kfuya ve'en listot mimena yamin u'shmol. It's a great mistake, anyone who thinks that halacha is frozen and that you shouldn't move from it left or right. Ela adraba, ein gmishut k'gmishuta sh'halacha. Rather, the opposite. There is nothing like the flexibility of halacha. Sheken yachol moreh b'Yisrael lifsok bo'to she'la atzma, bo'to sha'a atzma, l'shnei shoelim, right? This is his example. A person who is a posek could answer the exact same question at the exact same time to two different people who are asking it. Ulitrof lechad or lachsher lechad. And for one, he might say, or she might say, it's usher, don't do it. And for the other, they'll say, totally fine, go ahead. It's exactly what you need. And he goes on to talk about this power of the gemishut to halacha. And for me, halacha is something that is very personal and that should meet the needs of each and every individual. I'm talking for a long time. Am I supposed to say what I think some of the challenges of halacha are? I'm going to say that. Great. I don't know what we're doing. You'll ask any questions. So I do, for me, one thing I'll just say, because I do find halakha to be something I feel obligated in. I'll say a challenge that I think is a challenge for everyone, but it's important to sometimes say. I find davening extremely difficult. That is one of the mitzvot I most struggle with. I love learning. I connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu very well through learning. Every day I say, today I'm going to daven with kavanah. And suddenly 5 pages have gone by and I'm like, did I say those words or did I not? So that is like a personal difficulty. And I mostly daven, not because it connects me to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but because it is a symbol to myself that I am committed to doing what the Halakhic system wants for me. I'm saying this honestly. And I hope that HaKadosh Baruch Hu understands that I try so hard, but I'm just not so good at it. And that this is my sign of saying, I know I have to, and I'm doing it because I have to, even though it is really very, very difficult. I'll say that. I'll stop. There's so many other things that are problematic. You can speak.
I agree with a lot of what you said, and I think I want to circle around to identifying some of the places where
we differ,
at least from what you've presented. One of the things we have in common, both of us were students of Rabbi Ravender at various points in our lives, and I once heard Rabbi Ravender say, and it made a very big impression, he said, we in the Beit Midrash are already committed. We're not struggling. Should I be Jewish? Why be Jewish? Why commit to halakha or not? Yes, all of us here, he said, we've already made that commitment, and what we're struggling for and we're working towards is profundity. And we're trying to deepen our knowledge to be more profound, more sophisticated, because Shmirat Mitzvot, from a place of knowledge and sophistication, and you've done the chakirot, the investigation, you've seen the sources, you've seen how they developed over centuries of scholarship. Shmirat Mitzvot, from a place of that kind of knowledge, is just categorically different from something more superficial. And we in the Beit Midrash, having already made that commitment, we're striving for something else. And that made a very profound impact on me. I think it impacted, without I was being aware of it, impacted some of my professional choices even. I think my first position on campus was chosen so that I could also, at least a significant part of my professional life, could also be amongst those who had already made that commitment to halachic life, to an Orthodox communal life, and then their halachic challenges, or my involvement and support for them, and their halachic questioning, and it was all about, refining greater profundity in support of, a very rarefied expression of modern Orthodoxy as it exists on university communities. I think, and again, just sort of reflecting on my life here, now almost 2.5 years I've worked in the shul. I think halakha in the shul has a very different function. I think this is a as anyone who's spent time at Anshe Sholom knows, this is an unusually diverse Orthodox congregation. I think, in the 1950s, I think many Orthodox congregations were similarly diverse in the religious practice of the congregation, the membership. I think there are very few Orthodox synagogues in 2015 that are able to contain within one shul such a wide range of religious beliefs and religious ideologies and personal, Halakhic practice or not Halakhic practice. And so I think halakha, as it percolates in this congregation, is like a common denominator. It's like a base that governs like the way the shul functions, and that sort of allows us, sort of keeps everyone together, so that people who make all sorts of choices in their personal lives and come from all sorts of places and go to all sorts of places and believe all sorts of things, like we can all pray together sometimes. And
so you're saying the halakha in the shul?
Halakha, yes, yeah, exactly what I mean. Exactly, yes, yeah. Which is, so that's a lot of what, in terms of my own interaction with halakha as a rabbi, as a teacher, as like the questions I'm thinking about. A significant percentage of it is like what I'm intending something, which is this matrix that allows all sorts of diverse people to come together in one institution.
So that's interesting because I just kind of said the opposite. You would think because you have such a diverse crowd, you should be saying possibly different things to everyone, but you're trying to use halakha to have one unified practice that people who believe differently come into.
I think that being able to say that the synagogue ritual is Orthodox, to be able, and to be able to say, and it's Halakhic, and to be able to say that there are community standards of kashrut which are public on the website and distributed in the lobby, and anyone can pick it up and can, cook a kosher meal according to community standards, allows people with very diverse, that's a kind of like less sensitive, but right, people who eat chazer treif, in their personal lives, according to their personal convictions, they can host a Shabbos meal that I can go to because we have community standards that are, that are uniform for everyone. So that's not probably to disagree with what you said. That's interesting
because I teach at Pardes, where we also have extremely diverse student body, and we struggle with this issue because we don't want to just top down and do, my students call it like the lowest common denominator. It's really a challenge that we find about how to do ritual together and how. But it depends, I guess, maybe where the constituents are coming in if they buy it. But when they ask you private questions about kashrut, I assume you're giving different answers to different people.
Private question, if it's a private question about their, I'm going to my uncle's house and this is what they're going to feed me and what can I, that obviously that's going to be the who that person is and their age and their situation in life and the uncle and the relationship. That, of course, that's going to be very different. But I think the existence of something, community standards, I think it's a huge blessing. And in many Orthodox communities, kashrut is, it's about, who dresses which way and what can I guess about somebody's level of kashrut based on superficial things that I can observe about them. And I think that, and who eats and who's home, this is sort of like the information's there, it's upfront and it's common and uniform. So I think that, you're right, Pardes is obviously a very different model.
It's challenging. It's very challenging. It's a challenging model. And therefore we sometimes don't do ritual together. We break into little groups so that everyone can do their.
And that's a very compelling model to me, because I would never want to ask anyone to compromise on their core convictions just for the sake of, for anything really, if something's really core to who you are and how you express yourself religiously. I would never want to impose or ask anyone to compromise that, but there's something also very beautiful about coming to a place like this and seeing somehow, people are committed to this congregation, this community, and the thing that allows that to happen, I think, is the sense, there is this thing called halakha that governs how ritual takes place in this congregation, and whatever choice I make in my private life, when I come here, I know that's how we're all from different angles.
And that halakha should I feel like I'm interviewing. Decided by you? How do you figure out what the halakha should be?
So halakha decided by me. Contractually, that is actually what my contract says. So that's a yes.
So how do you go about? Meaning, do you take the strictest idea of kashrut, or do you say let's use a slightly more flexible because of who my community is. Or
So
you said ritual in the synagogue. I have no idea what you have women do in your synagogue. Like, how do you maneuver? How do you decide those things?
Okay, those are hard questions.
These are hard questions. Yeah.
I will come back to that maybe very soon. For kashrut, I think the standards really were existed long before I arrived here. I like them very much. They are, I think, simple enough and lenient enough that really anyone can adopt to them without undue burden, and I think they're strict enough that anyone can become relying upon them without feeling they're compromising anything. So I think they're really like a nice, like happy medium. In terms of singing ritual, I think that's that's a little more complicated because I am the one who makes the Halakhic decider for the community, but I think that has to happen for me, it's important for that to happen as part of a broader Orthodox community in a way that doesn't sever our ties. And that's a dynamic which is hard to navigate, as you know, and really important for me to navigate. And sometimes it's only through pushback that you, in both directions, that you learn how to navigate that. I think if you can get 80% of what you want with 20% of the controversy, that's going to be that middle ground for me that I want to try to navigate, although something is lost in taking that approach. And it's, look, I think there's what is halakha? I think halakha is and how does it change? It's a dynamic between scholars and a community that accepts the decisions of those scholars. And the larger the community that accepts the decisions of a given scholar, then that scholar's shoulders and ability to be creative is going to expand. But exactly how big one's shoulders are, sometimes you only learn when you bite off more than you can chew, and there's pushback.
So you just described it. The way halakha changes is there's scholars, and then they're in dialogue with the people that accept what they say. What about like grassroots movement within halakha? Do you think? That
in theory, or not in theory, that I think that has a place also, because communities can demand things of their halachic leaders, and communities choose ultimately would they vote with their feet about who they think is a posek who has the sensitivity and the training and the wisdom as well as the knowledge to guide them. I'm not. To me though, like that there would be an individual or individuals, a cadre of senior halachic scholars with just like sort of massive amounts of learning. I'm not willing to forgo that as part of the system. And so for questions of great complexity or great sensitivity, it's important for me that any community upswing or a rabbinic kind of initiative would have that kind of approval. That seems to me important because without that, I think something is lost. We have centuries of halachic scholarship has resulted in centuries of the scholars whose names we know through the centuries, and if grassroots movements can kind of veer in various directions without that cadre of scholarship, I think something really essential.
I think the grassroots movements are actually, it's that they're maybe not listening to the scholars. Scholars isn't the right word. They're not relying on authority now, but I think a lot of the grassroots base themselves on words and statements of Chazal, Rishonim, Achronim.
Right.
So the question is about what are halachic authorities? Is a halachic authority only someone living today, or can I say, well, look,
here's a position in the Ritva, how can we say that?
Correct. That's probably where we might differ, because I'm okay
relying on the Ritva, even if no one else.
Yeah. So maybe I'll say something about. I think it's important to say we're different because that's where it's interesting, and you'll tell me if you differ.
Mm-hmm.
Like I am someone who. There was a period in my life where I didn't do anything unless a rabbinic authority told me it was okay, and I would go and ask. I still ask Shiloh, but really the things that were important to me, let's say about certain things about women's ritual and practice, I always ask, and usually I didn't get responses that were suitable for what I wanted, but that was like the path, and I'm like not going to, I would see the sources I think say this, but I haven't been told that it's okay, and I wouldn't do it. But a real breaking point for me, and I really would call it a breaking point, it's now been about 20 years, was surrounding issues with my wedding. And at the time, I was telling David this, I wasn't even concerned with Agudath. I mean, a little bit concerned. I signed a prenuptial. But for me, it was more that I wanted this significant milestone in my life, twofold, to reflect what I thought of a partnership between two people should be. And second of all, I wanted my voice to be heard, and I wanted a way to honor my female teachers and my female family members. And lots of issues, but let's talk about one of them. I was very interested in women saying Sheva Brachot. I did a lot of research about it. And I first talked to my teachers. I was then closer to like when I'd been studying in Midrash Lindenbaum, Providence. And I would say, look what it says. And they say, no, what you says makes total sense, but I can't tell you to do it. Mm-hmm. Like there was always, people think I'm conservative. People are going to think I'm feminist, a horrible thing to think of someone. Both of those things, obviously, sarcasm that, but, and I was getting very frustrated because this was an example of things that I really cared about. And I was caring about it because I wanted halakha and religious ritual to reflect my life. And I had this crazy idea. It was so, at the time, I don't know, I still don't know what I was thinking. I thought, well, all these sort of lower level rabbis, I don't mean low in a negative, they're also worried about the politics. But I know that sometimes great changes happen in halakha when you go to a gadol who doesn't, has the broad shoulders and who is going to just not care, because they don't have to care about their reputation and they're going to just talk honest halakha. And I made an appointment, I maybe shouldn't say the name, to speak to a very well-known Haredi rabbi in Israel. And I bothered to find out where his office hours were and when he sees in the public, and he's an Av Beitin, okay? And I went to him to ask him about women in Sheva Brachot. And you know what? I would have even been okay if he had said to me no. If we had had a halachic discussion and he had said no. He treated me as if he thought I wasn't part of Am Yisrael. He's like, you come from the diaspora, that's why you care about these things. And I really felt, I left there in tears. I know you don't have to take the blame of this, I'm just telling you. I thought, why am I see yours opening, why am I begging? Why am I begging these rabbis to pay attention to me, to answer me, why am I only not going to move based on what they tell me, when they aren't even willing to look at me? Like, what did he think? I can't, why did I come to him? And I know he's not represented, but here, the people who would talk to me didn't want to move, they were petrified. And so it's to say to me, if anyone said halachically you're wrong, I'm okay with accepting that. But if you say to me halachically you're right, but I'm just too afraid to do something. And if it reached a point where I felt, why am I waiting and waiting to only move? And that, I think we were different. And that I then said, you know what? Of course, with my wedding, I still had a Masada Kedushin, so our compromise was no Sheva Brachot on the chuppah, but Sheva Brachot at the meal. But from that point, I tell that story because it was a breaking point for me where I was willing to say, you know what? I'm going to make, in my personal life where I have control, I'm going to make halachic decisions for myself. Because if the leadership that's supposed to be, that wants me to care about this communal authority isn't really interested in even being in dialogue with me. And so you can respond, or I'm just trying to explain to you why it's so different. I think those things are such, I don't know if there are other people who feel like me. I think anyone who doesn't fit the model right and is really looking, unfortunately, there isn't that much of a direct, I didn't understand, why, they could say to me, I wouldn't do it, but maybe you should do it for yourself. There wasn't that idea that I see in the text, and I see so much of thinking who's asking the question and what's the appropriate answer for them. That's why I a little bit am bothered. I understand what you're saying so beautiful about your shul, but this idea of making it, we all need to be the same. This is what orthodoxy is. And now we have to have a blanket statement about it. That's not what human beings are like. I'm sorry.
Right. It's not what human beings are like, and I don't need every human being to be orthodox or to be in the shul.
You're in dialogue with me, so I'm it's the people I'm yelling at aren't you, so I'm sorry that you're on the hot side. And I understand what you're saying about your shul.
Don't apologize for that's fine. That's a very powerful story, and I think you're entirely right that poskim have to there has to be you can't ask a halachic question or hand over significant parts of your life to somebody whose values you just don't understand. Whatever. We can share bad stories about things rabbis have said. I don't know if that's helpful. I think it's a big. I think and it's really been important to me personally that so many of my teachers of Torah have been not just really wise and scholarly, but also personal role models of ethics and integrity, and that's been really crucial to me. And I can't imagine my own life path had it not been the case. Had my Torah teachers not been people who are ethical role models and personal role models in many different ways. So absolutely, there needs to be poskim who are appropriate for the community that they guide, and the community has to vote with its feet and not ask questions to people who don't. If you're asked, and you see, all sorts of ways where there's this cynical, whatever. A lot of examples of people. There are people who. It's okay.
You can stop. It's okay. I agree.
The example to me of where this is really awful is in some communities where there's it's like the birth control shaila where there it's sort of underground information. Couples that want to use birth control for some number of months or years, when they get married before they feel ready to have children, but they don't, and they feel they have to ask a shaila of a rabbi to get authorization to use birth control, but they don't actually trust the rabbi. They don't really.
They want to
because they know what's right for them, and they know the answer they want, and they know what the rabbis in their community what they all say because that information is sort of spread, and so they know if you want the birth control shaila, you ask this person or that person, and if you and come with this argument, and then you'll get an extra 6 months, and that to me is a real. And I've spoken to people who've gone through that process or advised couples going through that process, and I think it's insane. It's a farce of halakhic authority because you know for yourself what you want. You know that there is a halakhic position that endorses what you want, but you feel the need for a heter is some sort of magical dispensation. Which is that's not rabbinic guidance, it's not pastoral help or support, it's not a conversation about values, nor is it real authentic halakha. But I think it comes from a sense that if I say, okay, Rabbi, I want to finish graduate school, or I want to as a couple, I want to develop our relationship for will the post have a comprehension of what that means.
And that's the topic because it's so scary. It's something that's so. To have a child when you're not ready is massive, and it's sad to me that Rabbanim apparently aren't being able to answer those questions appropriately.
Some are, but there's some aren't. But the
if you
risk.
have a question about birth control, now you know who to ask.
I've never been asked a question about birth control. That's not true. Not since I moved here. I've not had so.
You thought you were the 6 month extension.
That's
a community standard.
Right. I think, though, however, the risk in being very personal and true to oneself. So first of all, a few points. One, every relationship involves compromise. A wedding. Forget about halakha. People who are two non-Jews marrying each other, their wedding is all about compromise, right? It's about what they want and their vision, but they have their parents and the uncles and a wedding, so not to say that your concerns for your own wedding those are very important concerns, but all weddings certainly are about compromise, the couple or each member of the couple and their community and what everyone's needs are for that wedding. And being in any relationship with a community, with a tradition involves compromise. If someone were to tell you I do what I think is right, no matter what, if I'm convinced it's right, I just go ahead and do it. That's not an admirable, I think most of you would find that, right? You're not like that either, but just to take it to the extreme, that would be not admirable. That would be somebody who's kind of psychopath, right? That's someone who just does what they think is right all the time. And just one last point, I think halakha is an infinite number of possibilities in the halakhic system when it is studied and engaged in by a master, somebody who, the more you study, the more possibilities you uncover, the more creativity that you generate, which allows you to see topics from an infinite number of perspectives, and anything could be the possible outcome. And the risk then is that you have a really smart person who studies halakha and comes up with creative, compelling, innovative ways to re-understand and take, whether it's synagogue ritual or marriage ceremonies or divorce procedures or any other area of halakha in a dramatically different way. And if there are, 10,000 Jews who will follow that, okay, but if there are 10 or 20 or 30 who are going to follow that new path, then we splinter and we stop being able to pray together or to have a semblance of one community. I once, as a couple who had a very creative wedding ritual, and I don't know, I didn't know if they were married or not. Like I wasn't sure. Like there was a interesting wedding ritual that they had devised in consultation with a very creative Halakhic scholar, and I had no idea if they were married, and which wasn't terribly important, for me at that, but one could imagine that could create problems over time.
I want to say something, but maybe we should take questions and we'll say.
Say one thing and then we'll take questions.
I'll say two things. I'll say two things, really. First of all, I want to say about compromise that I said that I'm willing to make my own choices, but some of those choices are to compromise my views, meaning a lot things I do in my personal life, in my personal home, with ranging from birth control to like if I'm doing a mixed zimun, I feel like I have the authority to make those decisions, and I'm going to make those decisions for myself. But I definitely want to be part of a community, and the community that I feel most connected to is the Torah observant, Torah in the center community. And so you might think I'm still on the fringe and the edge of that, but I'm always, everything I do within that is always trying to be a balance of like how far away. Honestly, I think we should be completely egalitarian and have egalitarian shuls, and I would think you could be halakhic in that. But I'm not doing that because the community that I most identify with is completely not even close to ready, and they're not even ready for what I do in my, I daven at a partnership minyan. But that's a compromise to me of not going completely with what I believe, but trying to stay connected. So the question, though, you talked about splintering. I mean, I think that we could still be a united people. And I mean, there's Sephardim and there are Ashkenazim, and what modern Orthodox does is not the same as what Haredi does. And there's so many differences in our practices already, but yet we manage to stay considered to be like Torah observant Jews. That I just find, I care about women, I just find that I don't understand why on a woman's difference, so like that the shul does like this about women, that is suddenly going to fracture the Jewish people, right? Look at the Sephardi, go to a Taimani shul compared to a shul in America, an Ashkenazi shul in America. There's very different things going on there, and there's a very different feeling. No one is worried that if they continue to do what they do, we're going to be fracturing into two groups, and that's the part I don't completely understand in what you're saying of. I too do not want to fracture Judaism, but I don't understand why. I don't know. I'm going to say this. It's always in the areas where I think there's like a moral, ethical issue, right? There are many things that are hard in halakha, but I don't have a moral, ethical thing. So I'm not out there saying we should do something different. But
so I want to. Sorry, you have to wait. I want to say. I think a lot of my challenges, things that challenge me with like being part of this like Orthodox community, are not halakhic challenges, but are sociological. And I think so. I like one of the like things that like even like spurred me to become a rabbi was just encountering this like the strength and of real, I felt, kind of militant, violent xenophobia, mostly focused on Palestinians, that exist in the Orthodox community, and like just people saying really hateful things, violent things, warmongering things. And that's not halakhic, right? That's not a halakhic like challenge to overcome. That's I think a really ugly corruption of the soul that has infected most of the Torah observant community in some way. And I also reduced to tears as a teenager, and as a somewhat older person, like, okay, like I want to like take responsibility for like being a Jewish educator to try to like work to combat this element in our community. So that's not halakhic. That's a challenge that like I see like we're like really like not in the right direction, and we're sort of like our values have been sort of.
I would argue that you could use halakha or ideas within halakha to bolster your position.
Of course.
About the way someone should behave.
Absolutely. But in terms of like it's a little bit different from women should be able to say Sheva Brachot, and the current authorities are saying no. That's a little bit different than, I think the Torah has a message of like love for all mankind, and like our community isn't recognizing it. It seems a little bit different. And I think even on gender issues, I think a lot of sociological as well as halakhic. Like I'll give it like two examples. One, like the partnership minyan model of 10 men and 10 women, like sort of comprising a minyan. I think that is if like 150 people show up for Friday night tefillot, then that's it's like a statement about values, but it's I don't know if it's more than that. If there were a community that had 3 minyanim every day with 10 men and 10 women, that to me would be it would be halakhically like nothing. Like it's not a halakhic because that is a minyan, right? 10 men and 10 women is a minyan by all halakhic definitions. But for a community to organize itself for Shachrit, Mincha, and Maariv 7 days a week with 10 men and 10 women, there would be, I think, a really dramatic experiment in Orthodox sociology for men and women to organize their schedules around minyan attendance in this gender equal way would be a really interesting experiment to see.
Right, but I think that most women don't feel any obligation to come, so they don't. Maybe I'm not understanding.
Correct. No, right. But if there was a community that said, no, we're not going to start. We're going to wait for 10 women also, and we're going to insist on 10 women being there before we move forward. So maybe women in that community would feel that need, and to see a community, and that would require men and women to kind of shift their priorities in a way that would be really interesting, really interesting, in a way that a Shabbat minyan that does it is not so interesting to me. So that's a sociological change. It's not a
You're saying
change
because women are supposed to be with kids. I'm not.
I think there's some sociology in our community. Women are welcome to come to shul all the time. In this shul and many other shuls, right? There's an Ezra Nashim that's always open. It's always available. That's not
always a shul. Many times to show up at a mincha where the Ezra.
That's right. That's why I meant correct. I'm aware. I meant here. Let's say here. Here, that is the case. There always is an Ezra Nashim. It's always available. It's usually not very well attended. For all sorts of reasons that you suggested. So it would be no halachic change for us to say we're going to insist on 10 women also being there. That's not a halachic argument that has to be made, but it would be a decision of 370 member units. So we're going to shift our sociology, shift our priorities, and that's sociology, right? That's not halakha, and that would be a dramatic shift and a really interesting thing for me to observe.
It's also a value statement.
It's also a value statement, but it's not. In other words, the challenge is not here. It's not halakha, and I see it also outside of the contents of the shul, the rest of life is also very gendered and in ways that and sexist, and there's a patriarchy that's not just in our. So I think combating, creating a more less patriarchal society is not a halakhic. It's not only a halakhic challenge. It's also a human challenge, and you see it in all sorts of ways in our community. It's. Right. I mean, I don't have to give you examples, but I see it. You see it in even enlightened liberal Lakeview. There's a really all sorts of ways in which having nothing to do with halakha, they're really interesting gender dynamics that one can speak about and observe, and that's not halakhic either. So that's maybe. Okay.
Let's take questions. Yeah.
I'll step into controversy. So I come to the show from West Robertsburg, as you know. And I don't like talking about people's religiosity because everyone's from left to right. People, like you said, make decisions on their own, whether they're in a good world or not that good world. It's true. But, I think Rabbi Wolkenfeld said about having a show that everyone's comfortable in. So I could come here and feel I'm in an Orthodox show. That's very important. Now, I know the mechitza is a short mechitza, but I don't care. It is still a good mechitza. So, it's important. A lot of people won't come, but it's a mechitza. So Orthodoxy has been defined a certain way for generations. So I could come here and say, yes, it's an Orthodox show. So once you start tampering, then, okay, is it Orthodox or not? And that's why you need this standard that's been in practice for years at Anshe Sholom that says that Mitch Morgenstern could feel comfortable here, and I could hear Rabbi Spiritual Weinberg come here, and others could come here who they're not on the right of, they're centrist people, but they feel comfortable here because it's defined as Orthodoxy. Once you start tampering, whatever the argument is, it still becomes controversial. And this show is a center-left show, but people like myself, people like Rabbi Spiritual Weinberg, others could come here. My friend Alfie Cherrick, who's very right-wing, could come here because he could dominate an Orthodox show, and that becomes very important. So I don't want to involve in controversies, what should be.
I'll just respond to, meaning, when you say this is a halachic mechitza, but you do understand that for thousands of years, mechitzas didn't look like this. And when they first, right, with all the controversy about how the elder of Henkin allowed women to say Kaddish from the women's section, right, all the European rabbis went crazy because they didn't understand. Well, they did. That's just because now you've decided that Orthodox shuls look like this. But they didn't used to look like this.
Last generation, women didn't go to shul. There was always a gallery. Europe had galleries throughout. There was always.
They didn't always have galleries. They had separate things with walls.
But it's separate. But it looked like an Orthodox shul. You can't argue that, hey, we're going to change it to look like Orthodoxy.
No, all I'm trying to say to you is that this shul does not look like Orthodox shuls looked 100 years ago. Now it does look like what an Orthodox shul is, and some people chose to change what Orthodoxy looks like, and it became accepted, and now it's considered Orthodox. So I don't know what an Orthodox shul will look like in 50 years. I don't know.
It's going to look like it does in every Sephardic shul. Every shul in the Orthodox looks the same. You have a mechitza.
It does. I don't know where you've done, but I don't.
Every shul looks the same to me. Every Orthodox shul looks the same. Mechitza could be taller, could be smaller.
Well, that's already a difference.
But no, it's not. But there's a mechitza defined halachically. It's not different. It's a mechitza. Okay. Okay, but again, it is orthodoxy.
I have to say that their poskim would not think that this mechitza is a halachic mechitza.
Okay, but there are people who do, legitimate people. A lot of people, that's true, but it is orthodox. It's orthodox minyan. They
I'm not challenged that it's
orthodox. There's here, there's Tanasim here, there's everything that an Orthodox community has in the shul. And I don't know, you could say we could tamper with it, but it's acceptable to a lot of people. And once you start tampering, it becomes unacceptable. Then you may be outside of Orthodoxy, and that becomes a problem. You can do whatever you want. You could change the texture of everything.
I'm not sure your question.
But I'm explaining something. Rabbi Wolkenfeld said, you need community standards. There's a certain standard, okay, that everyone could be comfortable here, and you need that, okay? And, and so when I come here, this is like Davar doing a good show in the sense of we're all coming together, Davar to God. That's what I see here. And it looks like an Orthodox show. I can stand here and it looks like a regular Orthodox show.
I think you can't, let me jump in. I think you can't, in the last 200 years where Orthodoxy, separated or non-Orthodoxy separated in the different communities in America and Europe, there were different issues in each community that were the thing that defined an Orthodox shul or non-Orthodox shul. In Hungary, it was the placement of the bima in the middle of the shul and the front of the shul. And that was if the bima was in the front of the shul, it was not an Orthodox shul. And you could not go in, can't pray there. The shochet is the chazan there in Rosh Hashanah, his shechita is treif. That was the dividing line. No, that's not.
The mitzvah city.
Right? I mean, this is all happened in Hungary. This is real. This is actual tshuva about this. Not this great poskim said things like this. Rav Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva about synagogue architecture. And he says, in Hungary, that was really important because that defined an Orthodox shul. In America, you can have, if the shul's Orthodox, if the bima is in the front, they read the Torah from the front, okay, that's okay, that's really fine. It's not just a big deal. So I think it's, if a Martian were to come down and look at this shul and look at an Agudath shul and then look at Shira Chadashah or look at a conservative synagogue, it's unclear to me how the Martian would evaluate, looking at what's going on and how people live and what people do. I'm not sure which distinctions would to a Martian, would be the most significant ones. But that doesn't mean that to us, to Jews, to Orthodox Jews, certain distinctions have in different generations in different places do have heightened meaning. So the fact that we have a mechitza at all is really significant to a lot of Torah observant Jews, and does enable people like you, people like me, to daven in a shul like this. So I think.
I totally agree. My point was just that you seem to agree with me that yes, there are certain norms of what is accepted as orthodoxy, but those have changed, and they might still change. Not about
they might, but they also might.
Really, honestly, the way this shul looks would not look like it's not your typical Orthodox shul from 100 years ago. It's not.
There's a story.
And I'm sure that things happen here that aren't typical of what an Orthodox shul did 100 years ago.
Rav Keller once brought one of his students with him to a shochet with a chicken, with a chicken for shechita, and he went to observe the shechita, and the shochet took the chicken, and it was an American chicken. And American chickens in, I don't know, in Lakewood in the 1950s or 60s, whenever the story, in the 50s, looked different than the chickens that Rav Cutler knew from Lithuania. It's a different breed of chicken. And Rav Aaron was like outraged. He said to the shochet, "You call this a chicken? This isn't a chicken." And the shochet pointed to the yeshiva student that was standing next to her. "You call this a yeshiva student? Like, that's not." But sometimes there are changes that aren't accepted. So there's a risk. That's to me, like I feel it like
We're playing it out. I have no idea where the partnership minion movement will go. And I totally understand someone who does not feel comfortable davening there. I'm not willing to take the risk for myself and my kids to not do it because I'm worried of what someone will say about me. I need to have a place where I'm raising my children and where I feel comfortable that meets my Torah ideals to make sure they're committed. But I totally understand someone who doesn't want to, and we will have to meet here in like 50 years or 100 years to see how it plays out. That could be a difference. In Israel, though, like we don't have the same obsession with orthodoxy. Here, the word orthodoxy is so important that I don't feel is the same there. And honestly, I don't know, whatever orthodoxy is, I'm probably not, if orthodoxy is that, I'm probably not it. I think I'm a Halakhic Jew, I'm a Torah observant Jew, I'm a Torah committed Jew, a Halakhic committed Jew. I don't know what orthodoxy is. If orthodoxy is something that some body of rabbis says it is, then maybe I'm happily admitting a live stream. I'm probably not orthodox, but for me, that's okay. Because honestly, I have to answer to one entity, and that's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so I try in everything that I do to really think about what I think is a balance between what I morally and ethically believe is right and what I think Torah wants of me. And I hopefully one day I'll meet my maker and I'll be held accountable in a way that is honest for me. But I can't constantly be thinking what over there thinks orthodoxy is. And we could be different. We're different people, and that's okay. I understand.
That's a very powerful vision. I think I can't afford not to think what people over there say, because their opinions, if I recommend candidates for Giyur, and I want the Beit Din to say, I don't want the Beit Din to say you can't, if this is your shul, then we're not going to do the Giyur and move to a different neighborhood. That's like a very right?
I understand that, but that's like a whole other control issue. It's whatever.
We live in relationship with one another, and I think that interface of Kadosh Baruch Hu and the Torah and our conscience and the unfolding development of halakha also is refracted through a community, and that community can be very narrowly defined, or that community can be very broadly defined. And I think a narrowly defined community, it's like maybe it's all like Anshe Sholom, and they're really they're wonderful ideals and they're pure, and that's great. A broader community, for my soul, like who's nurtured me, what experiences have shaped me. It's a much broader places in the Orthodox spectrum. I want that to be still alive for me and for my children to kind of see other types of Orthodox Jews also as more similar than different. And it also means that I have to take responsibility for them as well. So that right in terms
I actually think we're quite similar on this. It's just whatever. I feel very connected to that community, and honestly, the people in that community who know me well, I think have less problem with me than the people who don't know anything about me and are making statements about me. Because anyone who really knows me knows how serious I am about Torah and halakha. And I think respects that. They might not agree with everything, but I don't think there is actually that much of a break. It's only when you look at these things in these large from up here that it looks, I don't know. We should take more questions. Yeah.
Your one comment is that you're defining different things. You're talking in the sense of a person who has great freedom. Rabbi Wolkenfeld, by contract and by bylaws of the synagogue, is our decisor. So in the tradition of old-timey Orthodox shuls, he can bind us. He makes decisions for us. He has to be cognizant of our differences, and you don't. You're totally a free spirit, and you're not overseeing a community. You're not binding a community. You're not dictating to a community. And he even, in a mildest sense, he can dictate because he sets our standards.
I'm very involved in a community. We're not a community with a rabbi.
But you're not the enforcer. You're not
Right.
the
Well, we have a
enforcer.
halachic committee, but we do things by discussion and
I'll say it
whatever.
again. You're not,
I am not the enforcer. I have
enforcer.
actually
You're
no
not binding
desire
the
to be an
committee.
enforcer.
and by contract, he is our enforcer.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you so
That
much.
actually means he has greater responsibility than me in a
Of
way
course.
that I think.
Of course he does.
Back in the back there. Yes. Either one of you.
Well, both of you, and then we can answer.
Yeah.
So this is
What
a
is
question for you, Rabbi Berkovits.
Yes.
When you were speaking, I heard two different things coming out.
Okay.
On one hand, I heard the sense of liberty and just making your own decisions is very empowering. You could say, I go to a partnership union because this makes sense to me. This fits with my ideologies and expectations for myself about feminism, etc. And so I was hearing that on the one hand.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, I also heard the reliance on others. So when it came to the Chovevei code for your wedding, you would approach several people and make the dress. You might leave it as far as to go to a Haredi rabbi. So I have two questions for you. Number one, when do you make halakhic choices for yourself and take your liberties? And when do you ask somebody else? At what point do you say, I don't know enough and I have to rely on someone else? And I think it's kind of particularly interesting that when it came to the Chovevei question, you saw the source for yourself, but you still needed someone else's approval. So really, at what point is there this self-
Well, I was much younger. That's what I was saying. That was a breaking moment for me. Yeah, finish asking, yeah.
And then my second question is, now that you're an ordained rabbi, how do you think that calculation would change for you? Like before, when you were making these questions and making calculations for yourself, you were doing so as a Torah teacher, but now you're doing so as a rabbinic authority. So how does that change that calculation for you?
Do you want to take a few more questions and ask them all, or do you want to do one-on-one? That was
I sometimes
question
say,
two.
it's sometimes good, but then you don't answer.
So answer, and then Mary will be
Okay,
next, and then.
Okay, so, but maybe I wasn't clear. I feel like that Chovevei was a breaking moment for me, meaning I came from a traditional Orthodox home in which I was younger, and I was taught, you don't do things, especially radical things, without getting, and I was very committed to being accepted within the Orthodox world and being part of the Orthodox world, and then I felt like that word orthodoxy was important. And so that is why, and also I felt like the wedding was things where other people were involved. So if I could say Rabbi X said it's okay, right? That's different than what I sit at my Shabbos table and do. So I do think that was a point where I didn't, up until then, I hadn't acted on my own. I mean, not small things that I knew the halacha, I would act, but not on anything that I thought was cutting edge and that I knew wasn't normative practice. That's not to say that in my life since then, I do ask Shiloh. I sometimes run by my halachic thinking with people that I think to be more knowledgeable in halacha than I am. Sometimes in a way where I'm not asking them directly because I want to just feel comfortable that I've made the right decision. But sometimes in areas where I don't completely know the halacha or I don't have time, usually it's in something more severe. I don't know what severe means. I still ask someone Nita Shiloh. I'm less so that I know it more now, but I feel like I'd like to, because some things that I think are, it's funny because you think some people think the women's issues are that. That's not things that I think that the consequence of doing it wrong has a repercussion that I don't want to go to and that I don't feel as confident in. Right? In Isser Karet is an Isser Karet, whereas I'm not sure what the repercussion of letting a woman read for the Torah is. Those are two different types of questions. Not to say that I don't make decisions for myself, but I think one should always be in dialogue with people who know more than you, and to consult with them. What else did you ask me? What do I do?
Changes things.
It's so funny. Not really. I would still on the places where I think I want to consult. Because I always felt okay making my own halachic decisions, it hasn't changed so much for me. I don't feel better about making the halachic decisions, but I felt okay. What is interesting to me is, if you had asked me before I was ordained, I would have said, students ask me halachic questions all the time, which was true, and I answered them. But what was fascinating to me was since I got smicha, people would say to me, oh, now you're a rabbi? Now I can ask you my halachic questions. People who I thought, really? Like, really? You wouldn't have asked me? I was shocked. And I found it, I didn't realize how important, like, the rabbinic authority was to people, because I guess I had shown disdain for it in my personal life. Honestly, I was like, really? Like, close friends of mine. I'm like, really? And it was like they were willing. It's not that they had a problem asking women, because once I got the smicha, they're like, oh, now you can be my rabbi. But that was surprising to me. That was surprising to me.
Mary?
I was just going to ask, so I'm sure that Rabbi Wolkenfeld delivers difficult halacha to people, and Rabbi Berkovits, that you have taught like very difficult parts of the tradition or texts that are kind of hard to swallow. And I'm just wondering what you think like the responsibility of the posek or the teacher is in those situations to make sure, right, to like deliver true, what you consider to be true, and also to make sure that people don't walk.
That's a good question. I think that it's always important to be honest. And so anything that I find difficult, I say, this is something difficult. And I think it's always important to say, if you are challenged by something that's written in the Torah, something that Chazal says, because whatever, I had experiences in high school where it was like you were never allowed to ask those challenging questions. I got in trouble a lot in high school of like asking the wrong thing or saying the wrong thing, and it made me think of halakha. I had negative views about halakha because no one would like. There's something, even if you can't solve the problem, to hear someone say, "This is really challenging. This is challenging to me. I don't feel comfortable with it." And then you could go on to the next steps of the conversation. But I think one always should call out what they feel to be wrong, and to say it. One thing that I really loved about receiving smicha from Rav Sperber, because he really represents something that I truly believe in. I mean, he spoke to us a lot about koach hetera adif, that it's easy to say no to things, but really the halakha finds being able to say something is okay is preferable. And I taught last night about my grandfather's view of halakha, and he really felt that for halakha to be eternal and to be true and to be the Torah claim of the Jewish people, that it had to speak to the problems and issues that were facing the Jewish people today. And I gave a share to show why he felt like, why he constantly, for him, it was the question of the status of women. I think I think halakha has to say things. Halakha has to have something to say. It can't just say the answer is no, because to me that isn't what Torah is about. I mean, it could say, that doesn't make sense what I just said, but I want to try to say it in a clear question. I don't know if you're asking me about something specific or not. How shall I say it? I think that it's very important for whoever's answering a halachic question to know who they're speaking to. And I think that it's important for them to say that this is challenging. And I think it's even important for them. I have students all the time who I can say, I understand if you're not going to be able to do this. Like to meet the person where they're at and to talk about maybe where I would hope it could change, or maybe make suggestions for them that I might not even do in my life. Because I try to find ways to help them stay within halakha and be able, if the question is something, if they just say like, I find it annoying, I can't use my computer on Shabbat, that's not to me a moral, ethical question. But if they say something that is really something that challenges them about their belief system, about who they are, then I think that the halakha needs to try to find a way to help them. I don't know if we're always going to be there. I'm talking too long. I'm going to shut up. Did you want to answer on that?
Sure. I agree with everything you said. I think I guess a few caveats or sort of issues that come up. One, if those who are, if you're in the world of the Beit Midrash, like every topic, no matter how, we're definitely doing the second sotas, like how sensitive or fraught the topic is, it's like subject, throw it into the mix and you discuss and analyze and question. And there's a risk when that discourse, goes from the Beit Midrash or even in the Beit Midrash, but it, touches upon like an issue that for somebody there in that discussion or in the audience or listening is not just an abstract topic of Halakhic like scholarship, but is like, something of existential importance. That's always a risk because you get into your debate and you're throwing svaras back and rationales and you're analyzing, but for like one person in the corner, like, no, this is actually like this is like core to like a big like existential crisis that I've been going through for months or years, and it can't be so easily talked to that. And that's a risk that I've seen that more than once in my professional life. Second thing to clarify, for who you're talking to, it's not just who you're talking to, it's what do they want from you? What are they asking for? What do they need from you? Like what's their contract with you? Is it the contract of like you're the posek for the community, or like do they want halakhic advice? So they coming into your office because I want halakhic guidance from a halakhic scholar, from a vetted, certified halakhic scholar for this conundrum, or really what do they want is like sort of wise advice that isn't necessarily like halakhically certified, or just they want support and empathy, and it's very obviously it's important to clarify what they want, and you have to, I think, like the response has to fit that. There are things that would be very good advice and you couldn't justify halakhically. Like a 14-year-old kid decides he wants to keep kosher and observe Shabbat, and his parents have no interest in right? So you couldn't halakhically justify eat treif for the next 4 years and then you'll move out of your house. But it might not be very good advice to say eat tuna fish for 4 years, right? Or spend Shabbat in your room for the next 4 years until you finish high school. That's bad advice, but it might be impossible to give a psak halacha that permits what might be very good advice for this kid in that situation. And somebody wrote that's an example that was published some years ago that I think is an interesting distinction. The places where...
Wait, so what would you do in that situation? I'm missing...
Sorry, maybe good advice to the kid would be, okay, look, your parents going to drive you to visit grandma. Okay, go get in the car with your parents, or eat vegetarian food on your parents' dishes, or whatever you might say is like, and then you'll finish high school, or over time you'll be able to have more autonomy over your life, and you can like become more observant. That could be very wise advice for a certain 14-year-old, 15-year-old in a certain situation. You might not be able to halakhically justify eating those foods or engaging in those practices on Shabbat, but given the age of that kid and like what it means to be a teenager in America, in the suburbs, or whatever, where he lives, where there's no one else around him, that could be very wise advice that couldn't be halakhically justified. And so I think that's an interesting test case.
And you would give it then?
I think I would. But only with the clarity of like what actually the role one is playing. I think you have to, if you're saying advice that can't be like if my qualifications are as.
But what if he came to ask you as a rabbi?
I think even asking as a rabbi, I think that it's possible. I think to clarify and to sort of to lay that out. The place where it's been most, where the 14-year-old kid, that's never come to my office. So that's an article I read. But I have had 3. Since I've been a rabbi, there have been 3 gay men who've come to me. None of them, like at the time, like openly gay to their parents or to their community. And I think it was pretty clear to me that the first 2 wanted like halakhic responses, and like they wanted me to like respond to them in my capacity as a certified halakhic scholar. And the third one, I think I may have like not handled that one very well because I don't think that's actually what he really needed or what he wanted from me, but I didn't quite, I don't think I handled that very well. And that's also a case where maybe good advice and...
So just out of curiosity, I'm pushing you. So did you start out by saying like this, I really have a problem with that verse? Were we willing to say that? Or maybe you don't have a problem with the verse. Like I would start out by saying like that is a horrific verse for you. And I find, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created you like that, and I don't know what to do with that verse.
I don't think that would have, for some of those...
I'm sort of relating to what...
For some of those men, that wouldn't have been helpful. I don't think they would have been helpful, because I don't think they believe that either. I think, at least at the time, I think they... These were very devout Orthodox men, and I think they... So we didn't go there. I think I tried to be very embracing of their situation and very affirming of their situation and affirming of them and who they are and the choices they're going to make forward. But I didn't think it was. That's a language I would use. So that to answer your question directly, that's a language I would have used. I think I tried to be very supportive of them and their situation and their. But again, I think for me, I guess that's also a matter of place, or maybe good advice or wise advice or pastoral, support might be in one direction, where something that I could say, like, this is halakhically certified. My training as, somebody who studied halakha could give me, beyond a reasonable doubt, I can endorse X, Y, and Z practice, and that, the things that I can endorse halakhically might not be good advice, and the things that I could say could be wise advice, or things I can't endorse halakhically.
Interesting.
So for me, it's about clarifying.
Separating,
But sorry, one more thing. So the piece though that sort of Mary said that also resonated for me. So I think it's important to clarify in what capacity one is speaking to someone, and to clarify what capacity the person is asking the question as best, and to be upfront also. Like, if you can't clarify, just to say, just to be upfront about maybe the different responses that one could give in wearing different hats. The other piece though, before I became a rabbi, I thought that my own faith in the Torah, whatever, in God, wasn't sufficiently strong that I could ever give somebody say no about something really important. I could never, I didn't feel that I had that capacity in myself to say no about something really, really important, and to them, and what. Really hard, really, really crushing for them to hear. If whatever the case might be, it could be a financial issue. I don't know, but they really important to them, and I'm really convinced the halacha is no. And I didn't think I had the capacity, enough faith, to give someone an answer that would hurt their feelings, hurt them, or could hurt them. And what I came to see, it's not actually on me. It's on them as well. Maybe even primarily on them. Like, somebody asks a question, somebody's submitting to the yoke of the Torah. It's really their emunah, it's their faith in the system. They're the ones who ultimately, in a free society, they get to decide whether they listen or whether they won't listen. And it's their faith that actually ultimately, they'll decide whatever they will or won't do. But it's not my faith that has to be broad enough and strong enough to withstand their, disappointing somebody. It's really they have to.
Because when Mary asked the question, she was worried about people walking.
Right.
Meaning, you raised the issue of the gay community, but I think that's really one of the challenges. That is one of the next challenges, or the challenge now that the Jewish community is facing. And I don't think the idea that the answer should be, if you don't like, just go somewhere else. I think these are people that are part of the Orthodox community that want to stay part of the Halakhic community, and that Halakha has to say something to them, and has to have a response, and has to find a way to celebrate their couplehood. It has to find a way to include them in shuls, and that doesn't mean, and whatever, I don't think we have to ask people what they do in the bedroom, as we don't ask straight couples that, but this is probably a strong place where we differ. Because to me that is a moral issue. I'm not going to be satisfied with halakha just saying no. I don't know what the no is going to be to, and I it's worth quoting here because I was so impressed when I found it. Yaakov Meidan, who's one of the Roshei Yeshivat Har Etzion, has this article they wrote in 2009 after the terrible murder in a gay club in Tel Aviv, and he spoke out. He particularly spoke out because a right-wing religious MK, wrote an article saying, "I'm proud homophobe," and he responded to say that this is totally inappropriate language. But then the title of the piece is called Ein Lahachmir Lemi She'ein Porkan Le. For his sexual? For his sexual release, for his sexual desire. You cannot be stringent on someone who does not have a release for their sexual desires. And he basically in the piece, and the title to me is so beautiful because he's saying he in the piece says if people have yeush in the halakha can't meet their basic needs, there's going to be a problem, and you should not be stringent with these people. He was not muttering anal sex for men, but it sounded like muttering all sorts of other things. He talks about they can have a chaver l'chaim, and he talks about that they have to have, if he's talking about release, that there's going to be some other sexual behaviors that they're going to do. And to me, that was a beautiful, he doesn't have the most PC language because he's coming from a totally different world. But that to me was a beautiful example of what I think halakha should be like. an understanding that our goal is not to be. He said I could answer this. He said the halakha does not talk about what other type of krava that these chaver l'chaim should have, what other kind of closeness. And he said it's good that the halakha doesn't say anything about it. And you could be stringent, but how can you be stringent for people that don't who will just say halakha can't meet my basic needs? To me, those are a moral question, and the need to find an answer for them is what halakha should be about. Finding an answer. So I don't know what you're saying no to people about, but if you say I want to eat a cheeseburger, okay, you could say no. But when something is goes to the core of who they are, I think it's very hard to not be able to state from the onset. I'm not saying this is where I was at. You have to state, I think, that this is something I find difficult. This is something I'm struggling with.
That's different. That's different from what your opening.
What was my opening? This
is wrong. This is terrible. This is hateful. Is it right? That's a.
Yeah. What was the difference? That this pasuk is a really difficult pasuk.
But that's not.
What did I say?
It's.
What did I say?
I think you to say it's difficult, to say it's challenging, to say don't understand, is to say the Torah leaves thousands and thousands of our Jewish brothers and sisters in this terrible dilemma. And
what did I say?
You said something much. This is a terrible. It's a terrible verse. I think you said. I hate this verse. Something.
I do think it's a terrible. What's the difference?
To me, it seems very different.
There are other verses. Elishech chukatech v'huyim shalbach. That's to your husband you should cleave, and he's going to rule over you. I think that's a terrible verse as well. There are lots of verses. I
think that the chance would be the fact that sometimes you have to impose rules that are difficult. I mean, it doesn't mean you think that they're it means there are difficult things in the world, but that doesn't mean that they're hateful or terrible for you.
No, it's also about the kind of language makes me anxious to just describe to psukim in the Torah. I don't feel comfortable speaking in such a judgmental way about psukim in the Torah, even though I endorse where you're coming from. I understand that. I don't feel comfortable speaking about psukim. There are verses that you want to grapple with, you want to reinterpret, you want to clarify, maybe limit the scope in which they're applied. And there are verses that over the centuries become much less important in Jewish life. But I'm not, the language of it's a terrible verse I don't feel comfortable speaking that way about the Torah. I don't.
Beseder. I didn't mean anything disrespectful to the Torah. I honestly, it's out of my deep respect for what I believe. I'm saying this quite seriously. What I believe, that I think that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from us as Jews, and what I understand about what it means for human beings to be created in the image of the divine, that when I see a text, yes, it's in the Torah, but we think many things in the Torah have evolved and developed, etc., that to call out injustice in the face of it, I think you felt like it was disrespectful. But I only mean it from the greatest respect. If I didn't care about what the Torah said, I wouldn't be bothered by what the Torah said. But yeah, I'm strong. I speak strongly.
I noticed. Israel?
I have a question that's a little different than the discussions. So if it's out of topic, then it's fine. You can just continue with what you were talking. I'm very interested in the relations between Israel and America. Understandable. How do you see? I have two questions, and if you think you want to refer to something else, then that's also okay. And question number one is: do you see a difference between the role that halakha plays in people's life in Israel and America? And the second question would be: do you see things that are changing or moving in different directions between the two big places of Orthodox Judaism in the world? That's my question essentially. It's been interesting to me. Question number. I have a third topic. Third question. Do you see how are the connections between the big poskim or the halakhic world in Israel and the halakhic world in America? Is there a connection? Is it totally separate? Are the two big places moving in different directions?
I'm all the time comparing America to Israel, especially when I'm here in America. A difference that I see from my personal life, although we have the Rabbanut Rashi that's up there and controls marriage, divorce, and conversion, and that can be problematic. I think on the day-to-day life of the average observant Israeli, there's what appears to be a lot more freedom of choice in how, maybe in the big cities at least. If you live in a yeshiva, maybe there's a similarity. What I mean by that is people attend all different types of shows. There isn't like, this is the one Orthodox show with the one Orthodox rabbi, and if you break from that, then you're creating a rift in your community. People go to, there are numerous shows without rabbanim, had them that are just in a miklat or in a classroom or in here, and people move between them, and so when you start a new shul, it's not a big rupture in the community, and I think that there's a lot more freedom in there isn't an RCA that's making statements about how you should behave. People are choosing the gradation of which community they want to be in, and they're free to move between them freely in a way that I see, and no one's really worried about what they're going to say and what that's going to say. And I was assigned this where I'm staying today. Even you go to you send your kids to Mamlechti Dati schools, the state religious school. The school doesn't make statements about what kind of bar mitzvah you should have, or they don't. At least in schools my kids go to, it's not. There's very little trying to tell you that you all have to conform to rules. Inside the school, there's certain rules they have to conform to, but there's not an idea as if if you do this behavior, then you're going to be kicked out of the school. If it's something, whether it is that you have a bat mitzvah, a parnashim minan, or that you have a party in a club, in a bar. There's much more, freedom of autonomy for people to practice as they want, that I feel in a certain way on the average day-to-day life. I don't know if you felt that's true or not.
I think that that sounds true to me, and that seems true to my experience in the time I lived in Israel. The other piece I'd say, American Jews now we've spent more time in Israel than maybe a generation ago, and we go more often and spend more time there. And so I think in terms of just poskim and Israeli positions that we learn about them, and it's I think Americans who spend Yamim Tovim in Israel are less likely to keep 2 days of Yom Tov now than 15 years ago. I think it's really interesting how that happened. That's sort of a ground-up, bottom-up Halakhic change that I think reflects a sense that American Judaism was really invested in Israeli Jewry, feels comfortable in Israel. More so than maybe a generation ago. It's getting a little bit late. Maybe we'll have one more question, and then, as then we can sort of have the moseying towards the door part of the yeah.
Yeah, two things. The first question that I had was, at the very beginning, was Rabbi Berkovits? What's her name?
Yeah,
Rahel. Okay, Rabbi Rahel. Who is the major authority that you were speaking about in the beginning that speaks the most to you in terms of what Torah Messina is?
Say it again. The
At
question.
the very beginning, you said that there's this whole array of Torah Mina Shamayim.
I was talking about within Chazal, within the Tanaim and Amoraim.
Right, but you said in one in particular speaks to you in terms of Torah Mina Shamayim.
That the Yud Gimel, that what was given was the Yud Gimel Midot?
Yeah, so explain a little bit more about that position.
Yeah. You said there was one particular.
Not the position that everything that's a comprehensive revelation of Torah Shabbat.
Oh, which Tana there that is?
I
don't remember which particular Tana.
And if you're speaking about later towards the Rambam.
No, I was just talking. I was talking within Chazal. There is there's the whole spectrum of this idea of what what was given, how it was given. And so it goes from minimalistic to maximalistic. And I was saying that for me, I prefer the more minimalistic, which is that the 13 principles, Talmudic principles from which the Torah, if you can interpret Torah, that has divine origin, but then it's handed over to you, it was handed over to the Chazal to interpret. But, right now I'm teaching the Sugya and getting to my Gemara class. And so there's a whole machloket, is Torah Megillah Nidna or Chatuma Nidna? Was it given piece by piece or whole? And what was interesting to my students, we did all sorts of Rishonim on it. And one of my students says, wait, in all this discussion, neither of the views think that on Har Sinai, Moshe got everything. Forget, not even get the whole written Torah, and neither of the views think happened like that. And he was quite surprised that something that maybe we get taught in this black and white way. And I think that Chazal themselves have a much more nuanced view, and there are many different views that are within what I would call a legitimate option of the spectrum of what you could believe about these things. That's
And
Yeah.
there's a wonderful book that Professor Jay Harris wrote called How Do We Know This? He wrote it maybe 20 years ago, and it's an intellectual history of the question of Midrash Halakha. So he has a chapter on Chazal and how there's different schools of thought in Chazal dealt with this question, and he takes that, continues through the medieval period and into the early modern period, and shows how this question, like the nature, the relationship of the Halakha to the written Torah, emerges in various times in Jewish history as a major question of debate, and it's a great survey of the history of that question. So if that interests you, that book is definitely worth reading. It really is very, very important for me.
I have to say one thing, because now I'm worried. I don't know what I said, but I don't, if it's a live stream, I wanted to say that I am, I think of the Torah Shebechtav as a holy, sacred book of our people, and I think it is a reflection of God's revelation in the world. But to me, being able to speak about it honestly and to say what I think about that is part of my commitment and the respect I have for Torah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If I said something too strong, I'm
That's
worried.
I
I don't remember what I said, but I have to have, now it's on the live stream.
So thank you for coming. Thank you to Davar and all our other sponsors.
Thank you.